Rwanda is aiming to stop all imports of second-hand clothing by the end of 2019. But how do Rwandans who depend on these items manage? I'm Femi Oke.
And I'm Malika Bilal. On today's stream, we'll look at the country's efforts to boost homegrown industries and end the trade in hand-me-downs. Send your thoughts via Twitter and YouTube.
Rwandan government leaders say that refusing used clothes, known locally as chagua and mitumba, will restore dignity to Rwandans used to sifting through piles of second-hand garments imported from around the world.
Since 2016, it has progressively raised import taxes on used clothing before a total ban expected sometime this year. The move hasn't been without cost. In July, the United States responded by suspending Rwanda from importing clothing to the U.S. tax-free. But the Rwandan government has stood firm. It says ending used clothes imports is necessary to rebuild its own clothing industry.
But the import restrictions have split opinion in Rwanda, with those who rely on cheap used clothing unhappy at the measures. For more on this, we're joined from the Rwandan capital Kigali by Danny Rugamba. He is a communications coordinator at Motions, that's a Rwandan fashion house.
Julie ZERBO is founder and editor-in-chief of The Fashion Law, which provides analysis on the fashion industry. She is in New York. In Kigali, we have Linda MUKANGOGA. She is founder and creative director of HAUTE BASO, a Rwandan brand specializing in ethical fashion.
And Jacqueline Shaw is founder of the Africa Fashion Guide. She's a fashion designer by trade. She's also author of the book Fashion Africa. She joins us from London. Hello, everybody. It's good to have you here. We're going to start with Malika.
And good to have this conversation online. So many fascinating tweets. I want to start with just two. So this is Moene, who says, bold decision by the Rwandan government for not allowing the U.S. and the like to dump their secondhand clothing on the country. This is a country that gives its people self-worth. So some strong words right out the gate there. But there's this question as to how we got here. Raylene says, in the DRC at least, it still happens. I was there in 2010 and I couldn't understand this business of selling used clothing and shoes. I thought it was clothes that was donated, but somehow got sold for profit. So when did this practice start, and why is it booming in Africa? Julie, you want to take that one on for us?
Sure. It started quite a while ago when Rwandan people and individuals across Africa were in need of clothing. Secondhand clothing imports amount to a large portion of the clothing that exists in Africa. And entrepreneurial businessmen and women in the United States, for instance, saw an opportunity to profit by monopolizing and coordinating shipping to Africa, even if those clothes were initially donated by civilians here.
Jacqueline, I want to play this little clip for you, and this comes from Reuters from the end of last year, when people in Rwanda realized that their source of secondhand clothing was about to become more expensive. Have a listen to this.
The good thing about secondhand clothes was that even with little money, you could still manage to buy something nice for your child, even if it was just a shirt. You could at least say that your child is well dressed. But now I see some children in my neighborhood walking around naked because their parents cannot afford to buy these clothes, while others are walking around wearing torn clothes. And that never used to happen because people had access to secondhand clothes.
I mean, initially this seems like a really bold move by Rwanda, but there are repercussions, Jacqueline.
Oh, absolutely. It's an industry that there's different levels. There's a hierarchical system within secondhand clothing. So you'll have particular grading of secondhand clothing that is being distributed at a particular end of the market. And as the quality goes down and down, it gets distributed to different, from the main town to the villages and the poorer regions. So you'll find in those regions where there's traders of secondhand clothing, this really is their livelihood. So if that's being taken away, then you will find that they will be jobless. They won't have the same businesses that they had before, the opportunities to send their children to school and so forth. So it does have an impact. As much as it is equally loved and appreciated and it's more affordable for some people, it does have repercussions, absolutely.
So in hearing that and the repercussions and of course how sad that is for someone to say that they're seeing children walk around without clothes, the flip side of it is that people online are saying it's the opposite. The degradation comes from the secondhand clothes. So this is Ivan Ash who tweeted in several things for today's show. He writes, secondhand clothes degrade people. Also, secondhand clothes choke local industries right down to the producer of cotton. He goes on to say that this is something that he wishes could change. My thoughts are that Rwanda is doing a good job in safeguarding her people and the Great Lakes region. And so, Danny, I wanted to give that one to you because this idea of degrading its people by allowing them to be able to buy secondhand clothes, talk to us about what that means.
Yeah, I think the ban is much about dignity as it is about policy formulation. We are seeing a lot of changes about how people approach the industry and how also they're willing to spend their money. So what fashion brands are doing in Rwanda is to change that. We are producing quality products, we are producing quality clothes that can be worn by people, and that because when you see secondhand clothes, it's some people who wear those kind of clothes, they don't even know what's written on them. They don't even know what the implication is. And so what we are doing as fashion brands in Rwanda, we are trying to change that mindset. We are trying to reframe that by producing things that we can personally wear and things that we know are giving us pride.
Danny, are you not talking about two different types of customer, though? You look incredibly smart, well turned out, but we're also talking about people who, now that the tariffs have been applied, cannot, to incoming secondhand clothes, cannot now afford to buy clothes for their kids. Are we not talking about a luxury market and then an everyday market for people who are just trying to look decent?
If you're trying to look decent, you will have to also see the way to approach it. Because there's no way that you're going to the market and wear something that has words that are not really giving value to you. So when we talk about the luxury market and people who buy from the high-end who buy high-end fashion products, we also have to look at the possibility of the fashion brands producing outfits that can be affordable to different income classes. And this is what we are trying to do as fashion brands in Rwanda. We are looking at the ways that we can leverage different resources and also cater for people who cannot afford the products that we are offering to those who are well off.
Could I
think
jump in there as well? Is that okay?
Yes, Jacqueline, and then Julie, I also see you trying to get in. Go ahead, Jacqueline, you start.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is one, when I did, probably 10 years ago now, I did a master's in ethical fashion. And I was looking at the secondhand clothing industry. And I took trips to Africa, and I went, in this particular trip, I went to Ghana. And I asked young people, because you have to know how people are thinking at different levels. I came with a very Western kind of mindset, thinking, secondhand clothing is vintage, is kind of like a luxury item, like you're saying. It's something that nobody else has. Is like I was saying, a hierarchy. So what I was seeing in the UK was different levels. And then when I spoke to those in Ghana, I was thinking they wouldn't want it because they're getting the lower grade product. And I'm thinking they wouldn't want it. Why would you want somebody else's clothes, or what do they call the salaula, as Karen Hansen, the writer of Salaula, the book, she calls it the dead white man's clothing. I'm thinking, why would they want this when they could get new products? But when I asked them, they were saying it was good quality. They like the fact of getting brands, and they like the fact it was affordable. So there are different levels of markets, like you're saying, of customer. But then I also agree with Rwanda and the government's direction in dignity, we've been saying here, as self-sufficiency, as manufacturing for oneself. So the country is self-sufficient in that. It's not reliant on trade or aid from other places, or second-hand clothing. It's producing its own. But again, there's going to be repercussions, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes, Julie, what were you going to say?
I don't think that this is a mutually exclusive issue. I think that there is, in fact, a need in many countries for individuals to have access to truly affordable clothing. It exists in the United States. And so I think that the ban does do a bit of a disservice while also serving to significantly bolster in the future the strength of domestic manufacturing, especially in Rwanda. But I think for the time being, it needs to be carefully measured to ensure that we're not depriving people of the ability to simply afford clothing.
Linda, I want to bring you in here with these series of tweets. One person who's handled a serial tweeper says, what about jobs? Do you mind that the more you import a less priced secondhand cloth, it kills at least 2 job opportunities? So some numbers we'd have to check there, but that's his take on it. He gets pushback, though, almost immediately from someone who says, so you seriously think that people will switch to buying locally clothes made overnight because there's a ban on secondhand clothes? President Trump in the US thought the same about Chinese cheap products, and go check how not so simple that is. So Linda, talk to us about what the alternatives are for people who cannot necessarily afford designer, locally made products.
I think this provides an opportunity for business people, entrepreneurs, fashion designers, and manufacturers to cater to different markets. It's not going to mean that every brand is going to be affordable for every market, but this pushes the challenge back to us as innovators. But I think that also we're looking at it from only one end of the stick. This is an opportunity to create jobs. The stakeholders you're referring to in your original question are part of the value chain now. The people that are consuming are able to make more by being part of the value chain, and therefore are able to afford some of the clothing that's produced in Rwanda. So I think there's 2 sides to look at this, not just focusing on the ban and what that means for consumers buying it, but also being part of the value chain to produce these items that represent where we're from.
Danny,
I think,
go ahead, Julie.
I think it's an opportunity for Rwandan-based businesses to start building manufacturing systems that will ultimately be able to provide affordable clothing, manufacturing that might not exist as of now, in part because garment manufacturing is expensive, and that's something that needs to be worked towards, oftentimes as a result of high quantities being made in order to lower the individual unit cost.
Julie, where have you seen that happen? Because this ban is right now. It's going to be 2019. So there's a gap right now. Where have you seen this happen successfully?
I haven't seen it. I can tell you where I haven't seen it happen successfully, and that's in the United States. Ever since the United States started manufacturing such a large percentage of its clothing outside of the United States, in China, in Bangladesh, it's significantly more expensive to buy made in the US garments, which is part of why the Trump America First agenda is falling short in many respects. The reason that Bangladesh is able to produce clothing so cheaply is because they produce so much of it. The United States simply can't compete with that.
Jacqueline, what were you going to say?
Can I just mention as well, get the, to get the biggest story as well, because we've got a few of African countries who are pushing the made-in agenda. You've got, even Nigeria. I've been, pushing towards, forgetting the Chinese, cutting out Chinese imports and focusing on made-in. Nigeria, Ghana as well, Kenya, and we all know the Ethiopia story, which seems to be the trailblazer at the moment, and Kenya and their agenda, got textiles on their agenda. But we have to remember, the fashion industry is worth, $2 trillion, $3 trillion. It makes money, it impacts. But then we also have to remember, where is the impact leading, who is receiving from that as well. But there is opportunity in the textile industry. And one other thing is, with the manufacturing, Julie was talking about the cost. We have to look at places in regards to their supply chain, because fashion is not just the manufacturing, it's a whole supply chain, very complex supply chain. And something like the cotton industry, if they're importing textiles, the costs are already going to be up. That's why there's a big push towards Africa processing its textiles and materials, so they keep the value in the country and on the continent. And so the process and the manufacturing is then being, the costs are being lowered if it's all locally sourced. But for Rwanda, someone like Bangladesh doesn't even they don't grow cotton.
Right.
They just produce a lot very cheaply.
Jacqueline, I hear you. And Danny was trying to get in here, Danny. But Danny, can I just show you something before you do that? Our team was in Kigali earlier on today and asking people what they thought about this ban or the upcoming ban 2019, where it would cost you more to wear second-hand clothes and buy them in Rwanda. We find some very optimistic people. Have a listen to them, Danny.
So the importation of second-hand clothes is not a good idea because it affects our hygiene, it reduces our GDP, it increases the dependence of our country to other countries.
I think the restriction of the importation of those clothes, the chagua, is a good idea because if we improve our products, the made in Rwanda products, we will be improving the development of our country.
Danny, you are part of that Made in Rwanda push. What are you doing?
Yeah, yes. I think now I'm a fan of these two young ladies. They really have brilliant points. And I wanted to, there's something Julie mentioned earlier of that there is a need to establish factories to see how we can satisfy the local market. And I think this is something that has started in Rwanda, and it's been here. Now we have different factories that are actually focusing on mass production. And you see that one factory alone is employing more than 2,000 people. Now that's an opportunity. Now we're having job opportunities in Rwanda. And this is something that I think if the trend continues, we are going to have a bigger employment. I think where the problem is, before we get very excited about the transition, is are we equipped with edge cutting technologies, and are we having enough materials? Do we have enough equipment to actually drive this change? And I think this is where the high-end fashion comes in. Now, the high-end fashion is not going to be the solution it's not the ultimate solution to this problem. That we can all agree. But I think where we can help, where we can support is we have a team of creative people, and the creative people can actually jump in with design concepts, with different kinds of support to actually see how we can. It could even be from dealing with other companies, dealing with factories that can produce for the big mass. And so this is where I think that we can, if we think this through, if we keep receiving the incentives from the government, that's where we can actually guarantee our support.
Incentives. What's an incentive from the government, Danny?
So
maybe I can jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can touch on what Danny's talking about, because we've benefited from a lot of these incentives and public and private partnerships. The government has put in, and both sectors actually have put in deliberate efforts into investing into growing our infrastructure. So there's opportunities like the Export Growth Fund, which we've enjoyed as a business. There's the Industrial Adjustment Facility and the Business Development Fund. These are all policies or opportunities in place to support growing our businesses and growing Made in Rwanda. So I think there should not just be a focus on the ban, but what's being put in place to complement the journey we're having towards establishing a very strong Made in Rwanda. So I think you can't focus on one end without highlighting the benefits that are coming as a result of the ban. So I think it's really important to highlight that. And I think Danny can build on that as well.
Danny, before you do, I wanted to bring in a couple of people who are on the same wavelength as you. So Inigo says the government should have a plan in place to assist the affected traders, those who are in the second-hand clothing industry. Another person writes in, this is Vengai, who says this is a good move, but the government must try to subsidize locally made clothes or put price controls, because local manufacturers have a tendency of hiking prices when they have no external competition. So two ideas of what the government can do incentives-wise there. Danny, your take?
Yeah, I think here the government, it's really good to have the investment plan and also work closely. It's one thing to have a plan, but it's also another to work closely with entrepreneurs and people in the fashion as well as the textile industry. I think there is huge potential. I was reading a few days ago how the number of imports in clothing in 2016 amounted to about $17 million. So I sat back really and I tried to imagine if we shift that, if we inject that money into local establishments, into local factories, how many lives can we change? Not simply from what they wear, but also from what they earn. So there has to be also collaboration. There has to be collaboration in different levels. Mm-hmm. And I think what I agree is that I believe the members of the government are not short-sighted. This ban did not just rein in abruptly. I think this is something that was contemplated upon, and this is something that they had to sit back and say, it's time for us to find the solutions. It's time for us to cultivate local solutions. So the government comes in, but also it doesn't stand alone. It has to be backed by the entrepreneurs as well as investors.
All the stakeholders, really.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it needs to be supported, like you said, by the government, by entrepreneurs, by consumers, the individuals who will be provided with jobs and therefore be provided with incomes. This is one part of a larger ecosystem that will impact the economy and individuals on a very daily basis, and that's not accomplished simply by a ban. There needs to be support every step of the way.
And I think there's certain policies in place that are helping us bring down our cost to produce. For example, the tax exemption to bring in raw materials. As you know, Rwanda is a landlocked country, so we rely a lot on getting our raw materials outside. So there has been some thought into how do we bring in textiles so we're able to produce locally at an affordable cost.
Jacqueline, I'm just thinking if we come back to this topic in 5 years' time and look at Rwanda's fashion and clothing industry, what do you think we might see?
I definitely think there's going to be more production units. I think if they follow suit of what's happening in Ethiopia, which is, like I said, seen as one of the trailblazers right now for African production, that there are going to be more investors, external investors coming in to set up factories. So some of the big retailers, like you have the H&Ms and the Gap and PVH groups and so forth, we will be setting up production units. So that I see and I predict will be more. But I wanted to just add on quickly that we can't forget that, you know, the fashion industry is moving towards this whole circular fashion kind of direction, which is to combat waste, and that the secondhand clothing industry is a major aspect of the waste industry. And knowing that there is secondhand clothing opportunity, it means that those in the West tend to think that they can just buy fast fashion or throwaway fashion because it's going to go somewhere to these you know, African countries or, you know, poorer countries.
So maybe we need a reset about how we think about clothing all over the world, not just in the West, but all over the world. Thank you so much, guests, for your contribution to our conversation today, Malika.
I'll end with two sides of this debate online. Odomo on Twitter says, I don't take this as degrading because a lot of people in Uganda and Rwanda cannot afford to buy new clothes. Therefore, people should be allowed to buy secondhand. And on the other side of that debate, this via YouTube, Radical Nomad says, economic neocolonialism can be overcome by nurturing our own industries. Ban secondhand imports.
That's all for today's show. Malika and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.